So late Sunday night, or technically early Sunday morning, President Trump took to his cheap Twitter knockoff of a social media site, Truth Social, and he hereby declared that President Biden's pardons, or at least some of President Biden's pardons, are null and void because they were signed using an auto pen. And an auto pen, for those of you who don't know, as the name suggests, is a kind of automatic signature. You sign using an auto pen, and then instead of having to manually sign over and over and over again, the auto pen just kind of does your signature for you. And it is a method that people use a lot of times if you're signing autographs, or that presidents have used in the past for all kinds of reasons, including for signing pardons. It's never really been a problem, at least it hasn't been a problem, or it hasn't been thought of as a problem for many, many years, because this is just a normal thing that presidents, along with lots of other people who have to sign things a lot, do. But for Trump, now it is a problem for some of Biden's pardons, because he wants to throw those pardons, and some of the pardons that Biden issued, especially on his final days in office, they were issued preemptively to people that Biden predicted or expected would be targeted for retaliatory investigation and prosecution by the Trump Justice Department, including members of the January 6th committee, who played a very important role in exposing and recording, for the purposes of the public record, the antics and crimes, etc., of many of the Trump supporters who carried out the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Now, those people who committed those crimes on January 6 have been pardoned by President Trump, because he doesn't care if you commit crimes as long as you're committing crimes for him and not against him. If you commit crimes against him, or better yet, if you don't commit crimes against him, if you just do stuff that's totally legal, but you do it against him, he doesn't like that. But if you commit crimes for him, that's completely fine. And he's now established that, if he feels like it, he'll pardon you. You won't even have to pay any sort of penalty for committing crimes to help Donald Trump. But he's already done that, and now he wants to go after many of the people who were responsible for investigating and shedding light on the crimes of the January 6 criminals, the January 6 insurrectionists who Trump has pardoned. But a lot of those people were pardoned by President Biden. So now Donald Trump is coming up with this excuse as to why Biden's pardons didn't count, because he used an auto pen. And of course, Trump didn't do any of this himself. Trump didn't come up with this on his own. This is based on an investigation, and I might as well go ahead and throw my little quoties around that too. An investigation conducted by the Heritage Foundation, a very upstanding and independent outfit that found that many of President Biden's pardons and executive orders and other things that President Biden signed during his presidency were signed using an auto pen. And because it's President Biden, and because the narrative surrounding President Biden, pushed primarily by Republicans, is that he's a doddering old man who doesn't know what planet he's on, and he's in serious cognitive decline, and never mind all the evidence that that's not actually true. But because these orders and pardons under Biden's authority were signed with an auto pen, that must mean that he didn't even know what it was, that he didn't even know what he was signing or what was being signed in his name. So therefore, the pardons don't count. Now, as I said, the Heritage Foundation, not exactly the most reliable source for this kind of information, or to be conducting this sort of an investigation. There's an article about this from Axios that kind of sums up the situation. This is written by Jason Lalji, and the relevant portion of this that I want to read to you comes midway through the article under the subheading, "Did Biden use an auto pen?" Quote, "Biden has used an auto pen before," NBC News reported, "but Trump's Monday assertions that the pardons were signed without Biden's participation lack evidence. Trump's assertion mirrors an argument made in an ex post from the Oversight Project, a branch of the Heritage Foundation, the think tank behind Project 2025, which claimed that the pardons Biden made on January 19th were signed with an auto pen. By the way, let me just pause there before I read the last little bit. Heritage Foundation, yes, of course, responsible for Project 2025. Remember when Project 2025 briefly became a major campaign issue that Democrats were pounding Republicans with and using to try and convince voters that, electing Republicans to office, especially electing Trump to the presidency again, would be a terrible idea because they laid out this blueprint of what Trump was going to do called Project 2025. And it was a fucking nightmare. And Trump's response to that was, I don't know anything about Project 2025. I don't know anything about the people who wrote that. I have no idea what Project 2025 is or who made it. I'm completely innocent in all of this. And now here he is citing the Heritage Foundation and their investigation into the Biden auto pen scandal as evidence that Biden's pardons should be considered null and void. I'm just pointing out yet another instance of Trump definitely knowing what was in Project 2025 and working with the people who wrote it and doing everything he can to implement the things that Project 2025 said he should have implemented. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, to finish the quote from the Axios article, there is photographic proof, however, of Biden signing several of the documents that the Heritage Foundation is claiming were signed by AutoPen, Newsweek found. This is one bright spot for anyone who might be finding themselves the target of a retaliatory investigation from someone in the Trump administration, either from the Justice Department or from a congressional committee or what have you. The one thing you might have to sort of cling to for some hope, if you are the target of some kind of weaponized investigation from the Trump administration or from the Republican Party, is how bad it seems like they are at investigating. We've seen the same thing happen recently many times from the Department of Government Efficiency, the imaginary government agency headed up by Elon Musk that is supposedly saving us all billions and billions of dollars by cutting waste and fraud from the federal budget. And how many times have they publicly announced some massive dollar amount of supposed savings and then had to go back and revise that number because it turns out they counted the same thing like 2 or 3 times by accident, or they added some extra zeros to a total and they had to recalculate the figure. And this is the same thing. The Heritage Foundation conducts an investigation of Biden's signatures and concludes, oh, look at all these examples where he clearly used an auto pen to sign these documents, to sign these orders, and to sign these pardons. Again, never mind the assumption that using an auto pen is bad, which is an assumption that nobody has made seriously up until this point. Never mind that. There's photographic evidence that Biden did actually personally sign some of the documents that the Heritage Foundation concluded had been signed by an auto pen and therefore were of suspicious provenance and may in fact not be legal because he used an auto pen. They're really, really bad at this. That might end up being the saving grace of democracy. This is just another example of Trump running up against a law or some kind of legal precedent that he doesn't like, some kind of legal barrier to stop him from doing something he wants to do, to stop him from getting somebody he wants to get. Because he wants to get those people, those members of Congress, especially that were on the January 6th committee. He wants to get them and make them pay for crossing him, right? And now there's this obstacle, the pardons that Biden issued that's stopping him from doing it. Dr. Fauci, that's another one. Oh, Trump wants to get Fauci. He wants to get him for some reason. He wants to blame some shit on him and get him, right? Because a lot of his mutant right-wing supporters who are still upset that they were asked to wear masks and get vaccinated, they're still super pissed at Anthony Fauci for being part of that. So Trump's going to get him. He's going to get even with Dr. Fauci for attempting to enforce rational public health policy during a pandemic. But Fauci was pardoned too. What's a president to do? Well, just make up a reason why those pardons don't count. Just like recently when a court ordered Trump or the Trump administration not to fly a group of people, not to deport a group of people to El Salvador. And he did it anyway. And now they're in El Salvador, and there's nothing that can be done about it now. He just straight up ignored the court order. He just did whatever he wanted because Trump realizes he's not a smart man, but he's smart enough to know that if a court tells him not to do something, or Congress tells him not to do something, or existing law and legal precedent tells him not to do something, even if the Constitution itself tells him not to do something, and he goes ahead and does it anyway, and nobody stops him or punishes him for it, that's just as good as being allowed to do it. It doesn't make any difference. If you break the law and nobody enforces the law on you, the law might as well not even be there as far as you're concerned. And Trump gets that. And he knows he has a sympathetic Supreme Court at the top of the judicial branch. And he knows that he has Congress that is controlled by an incredibly compliant Republican Party, an incredibly sycophantic, obsequious Republican Party that is going to let him do whatever he wants. So why shouldn't he do whatever he wants? We've known about this part of Trump. We've known about this side of Trump since the beginning. And it's in his own personality, and it's in his own actions in the past and his own statements about what he is going to do or what he would do if he were elected or reelected. But it's also in the fact that Trump has said numerous times in interviews that his favorite U.S. president, other than himself, presumably, is Andrew Jackson. And if you look at Andrew Jackson and you compare Andrew Jackson to Donald Trump, there are some differences. Jackson seemed to possess some form of integrity. Trump has none. Jackson seemed to possess the capacity for some personal physical courage. Trump has none of that. But in terms of how they viewed the role of the president and how they governed, there's a lot of similarities. Jackson, like Trump, had no use for anybody who told him he couldn't do something. He was criticized at the time during his 2 terms in office for being an imperial president, for thinking of himself or expanding the powers of the president such that it was more like a king. He was not the elected chief executive of the federal government. In his mind, he was a king. He was an emperor. He was unchallengeable. Whatever he wanted to do, he would do. There's a very famous quote attributed to President Jackson, which he may or may not have actually said because it was reported secondhand, but it was when the Supreme Court ruled that he could not implement a portion of his what at the time would have been called his Indian policy, his attempt to enforce federal law on members of the Cherokee Nation in Georgia and forcibly relocate them. And the Supreme Court actually sided with the Cherokee and said, no, like the federal government has recognized these people as an independent nation and we cannot force them to obey federal law. Like this is a limitation that the president and the federal government has in our interpretation of the law. And Andrew Jackson basically said, let's see him try and stop me. I believe the actual quote is something like John Marshall has issued his ruling, now let him enforce it. John Marshall being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And that is very much Trump's attitude toward pretty much anything. And it comes from, I don't know, I was about to say his idol, Andrew Jackson. I don't know how much of an idol Andrew Jackson really is to Trump. I don't know how much Trump even really knows about Andrew Jackson's presidency. I think he probably has just heard stories about him and what an autocrat he was and thought, that's my guy. That's my guy. They do have a lot in common. Like I said, their attitude toward authority, their attitude toward immigrants, their autocratic dictatorial whims and instincts. They both We're inordinately fond of tariffs. Like there's a lot of commonality between Trump and Jackson. And in a way, that's almost comforting to me. Comforting in the sense that in these times in which we live and in this predicament in which we find ourselves right now, you sort of search for comfort and you kind of take what comfort you can find. It's not a great comfort, but it's there. And it's the fact that Andrew Jackson was president in the early 19th century, in the 1830s. And we survived. The United States survived Andrew Jackson as president. And we have survived other autocratic presidents. We have survived other periods in our history where the government became very heavy-handed and very harsh toward people of color, toward immigrants, toward political dissidents. Think about the Red Scare in the 40s and 50s and compare that to how pro-Palestinian protesters are being threatened and mistreated through the immigration system and through ICE and things like that today. We have been through periods like this in history before. And we have survived. That is a comfort to me. But that comfort, and if you take comfort from that as well, I think that's great. I feel like that's a good thing. But as we take comfort from that knowledge that the United States has been places like this before, and we have endured and we have survived as a nation, we can't let that make us complacent, because that survival didn't happen all by itself. If we do survive the Trump administration, if we do get to the end of this presidency and we are still something resembling a democracy, if we are still enough of a democracy that we can heal and repair the damage and continue, and at some point in the future, continue making progress toward becoming a more perfect union again, after Trump is gone and after all of his enablers and supporters are no longer in power, this all isn't going to fix itself. Trump and the damage that he is doing right now to this country, socially, politically, legally, all of it, it can be survived, it can be repaired in time, but it will not happen by itself. It's going to take political will and political action, and it's going to take all of us working toward that. It's going to take us all participating in the political process, voting, volunteering, getting involved in many different ways. It's going to take more than that. It's going to take us organizing. It's going to take us being visible, using our voices, making sure that we can't be ignored, talking to our members of Congress, whether they are on our side or opposite of our side, letting them know what we want, letting them know what we demand of them as our elected representatives, and letting them know if they refuse to do the right thing, if they refuse to stand up for us, then we are not going to stand up for them and we are going to vote them out of office. We need to be doing all of this because this Trump presidency, this authoritarian takeover of the federal government, this lurch into fascism that we are currently living through, it does not have to be the end. People talk about this as though it's already done. There's a lot of negativity and a lot of pessimism that I see, especially on social media, from people going like, well, forget it, it's over. America, it's done, forget it. This is over. This is over. And it is if we allow it to be, sure. It is if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we all decide, yeah, you know what, we had a good run, or maybe we didn't. But whatever it is, it's over now. Trump won, the Republicans won, the fascists won, that's it, it's over. Well, if that's the attitude of enough of us, then that's what will happen. But it doesn't have to be that way. We've survived things like this in the past. We can survive this if we want to. And if enough of us work hard enough to ensure that survival. We survived President Andrew Jackson. We survived Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare. We can survive Donald Trump. We can. Now, will we? That's a whole different question. That's a whole different question. But we can. We just have to make sure that we put up more of a fight against him than he is putting up against us.